Mm.
And it's like we have to be more discerning. We have to be more thoughtful and we have to be more curious. Like we have a responsibility it's not just men that have the responsibility. All of us that aren't men have a responsibility to be more curious and more welcoming.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that there aren't people out there doing harm. And please, can we just understand we're not speaking in black and white. We're being discerning. But
Mhm.
when someone is showing that, can we welcome them with love?
Mhm.
Can we hold space for them with love? Can we witness them in love?
Well, you said something that was kind of very interesting. You said, that when I show fear, that's when you recognize your reaction to my fear.
Hmm.
And so that's a really interesting thing that you did, which is to stop, push, pause, notice that, oh, I have fear about his fear.
Hmm.
And right now it might not be about my fear.
Right. Like I really just had to track. I remember it started in COVID, I think, because
Well,
COVID was freaky.
yeah. And, and the apocalypse has always been one of those things that I'm like, oh my God. But I think what I've gotten to, and maybe this is quite evident, is that one of the reasons perhaps that men are not afforded those more vulnerable feelings is the feelings that it creates in their counterpart.
Oh, well, I know when you show vulnerability and like men, it makes them uncomfortable. When you show
Right.
softness, it makes them uncomfortable.
Hmm.
Sorry,
Hmm.
go ahead. You were saying
Well,
something.
just their reaction to that, right? Like I'm having a reaction to your reaction, and I don't like the reaction in me.
Hmm.
And so what you did so beautifully, I think, is you stopped and you noticed what it brought up in you, and you said, okay, this isn't really about me right now. This is about his fear.
Hmm.
But if you had reacted to my fear, and I mean, usually fear begets anger,
Hmm.
or often, if you had then reacted to my fear and the feelings of fear that created in you in anger, that would have polarized us. I would have lost trust in you.
Yeah, that would have really sucked.
I think it's an interesting piece to talk about later, but we're probably running out of time.
Yeah, we're running out of time, but hope you enjoyed the conversation. We are on YouTube now.
Do we want to talk about like any sort of practical pieces around vulnerability? I think we've just uncovered one that perhaps if you notice that your counterpart, maybe your male counterpart, is experiencing some vulnerability or feelings that are below that bottom pain, so to speak. What is it bringing up in you? And
Hmm.
can you stop and notice, like
Hmm.
what's happening for you as you notice this, and are you able to make room for that vulnerability? How do you feel about your man's vulnerability?
Well, I mean, it's that mindfulness practice of tracking. Okay, I'm having a reaction in my body to this. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? How do I want to respond?
Mhm,
You
mhm,
know, and
mhm,
again, mindfulness is not exhausting. It's actually so liberating. And that's part of it is like having that practice of tracking what is happening in this moment between us.
right. And I also love the idea of befriending the self around this. If you're having feelings in this particular case, I guess it doesn't matter, man or a woman, if you're having vulnerable feelings that are making you uncomfortable, personification of those feelings is often really helpful, right?
Mm.
To see them as a part of you,
Mhm.
to recognize that there's a part of me that perhaps there's a little boy in me that's scared shitless,
Yeah.
right? Right. There's a young girl in you that just wants to know that she's safe.
Mhm.
Um, and when we can begin to recognize that that's not the totality of me, there is a younger version of me that is experiencing this, then very often that can be particularly helpful to begin to foster a relationship with that aspect of ourselves through journaling with it, spending time with it, quite literally spending time with it. That sounds kind of strange, but in almost every brand of therapy out there, there is a version of working with your parts of self. And
Your
so
shadow parts, those, vulnerabilities in man's shadow often.
that's exactly right. And we want to shove them further down into shadow, and they typically come out sideways. And so I'm encouraging anyone who is doing that currently, um, look no further than your addictions for your shadow, right? Alcohol's not your problem. Drugs are not your problem. Doom scrolling is not your problem. Those are actually the salve right? You're trying to salve that wound. You're trying to anesthetize yourself to the vulnerability of those shadow aspects that you talked about. So building a relationship with those parts is a really important step. Being mindful and aware of how it's making you feel, and being able to look at what part of me is coming up around that.
Mm.